Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to Saturday Cyber. If you're studying for the CySA Plus exam, you're in the right place because we're about to dive into one of the most intimidating parts of that test, the performance-based questions, or PBQ. In this video, we're going to walk through a full PBQ scenario from start to finish. We're going to look at actual log data, we'll identify the indicators of compromise, then map it to MITRE ATT&CK, and finally, answer some practice questions. Stick around to the end because I've got some PBQ strategy tips that could seriously save your score on exam day. Let's get into it. Alright, so here's our scenario. We're a Tier 2 SOC analyst at a financial services company, and our SIEM just fired off a Priority 1 alert on a workstation called WKS-042. Our job is to review the logs, identify indicators of compromise, figure out what kind of attack is happening, and then pick the right containment action. Okay, we're ready to dive into this thing now. We've got output from 3 sets of logs to work through: a firewall log, a Windows event log, and a DNS query log. My approach is always, scan first, don't read every line. With this first look, you're doing a quick scan for patterns. Look for any unusual stuff that stands out. By that I mean, basically, these are the types of things I'm hunting for in log output. Unusual or unexpected port numbers. Sometimes you may even see known malicious ports. Repeated connections to the same external IP address. Processes spawning other processes in unusual ways. Off-hours activity. Or large data transfers. Alright, so let's take a look at the firewall log. The first couple of lines are pretty normal. Port 443, that's HTTPS. Yep, normal. But then at 2:17 a.m., boom. We see outbound TCP connections to 198.51.100.22 on port 4444. Not normal. If you see port 4444 on the CySA Plus exam, and honestly in real life, you should pay attention. That is a known malicious port for Metasploit tools. That's a big ol' red flag. And then, a few minutes later, we see a 3.2 megabyte upload going to that same IP. Data is leaving the building. Data exfiltration is really bad. One more line of interest here is the last one where we see an internal SMB scan using port 445. That is a legitimate port that's commonly used by networks. What makes it unusual is tying it in with the bigger picture. We can see from previous entries that there was a successful intrusion. What this SMB scan entry tells us is the attacker is now attempting to move to other devices on the network, also called lateral movement. So we know we have bad stuff happening here from the firewall log. Let's take a look at the Windows event logs now. Event ID 4688 is process creation. Look at this chain. Outlook.exe spawned cmd.exe, which then spawned PowerShell.exe. That -enc flag means the PowerShell command is base 64 encoded. Why would anyone encode a legitimate PowerShell command? They wouldn't. This is obfuscation. The attacker is trying to hide what that command is actually doing. Then, some real proof of what's going on. We see meterpreter.exe get spawned by PowerShell. Meterpreter is a Metasploit payload. This is not a false positive. This is a live intrusion. We also see a new scheduled task called Windows Update Helper. Sounds legit, right? That's the point. That's a persistence mechanism. The attacker wants to survive a reboot and maintain control over this device via a task that looks mundane and can run quietly in the background. And Event 7045 shows a new service installed, SVC Host Helper running from c:\temp. Anything running from c:\temp is immediately sketchy. That's not where legitimate services live. We also see more evidence of their lateral movement attempt in that last line for Event ID 5145. I think we have everything we need from the Windows event log, so let's move on to the DNS output. We see queries to update -patch.xyz. That domain is doing domain generation algorithm-style subdomains like A1, B2, C3, and exfil. When you see high-entropy, randomized subdomains, that's a classic sign of C2 beaconing or DNS-based exfiltration. So now we've got the full picture. This isn't random. This is a coordinated, multi-stage attack. At this point in the exam, you should be able to answer the questions and move on. For this practice exercise, I'm going to walk you through a review of the indicators of compromise and then map it to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Let's go through the indicators of compromise first. I've organized these by severity. The parent-child process chain, Outlook.exe to CMD.exe to PowerShell.exe. This is your initial execution. Encoded PowerShell means obfuscation equals evasion equals bad. Meterpreter.exe. This is literally a known offensive tool. The C2 connection to 198.51.100.22 using port 4444 is an active command and control channel. The update-patch.xyz domain indicates malicious infrastructure. The 3.2 megabyte upload means data exfiltration is confirmed. Two persistence mechanisms, a scheduled task and a new service. The attacker wants to stick around even if the machine reboots. SMB scanning to an internal host means lateral movement. The attacker is trying to spread inside the network. When you see a chain like this, you're not looking at one bad thing. You're looking at a sophisticated, multi-stage attack that has already progressed pretty far. The attacker got in, established persistence, and is actively stealing data. This is a big bonfire, all-hands-on-deck type of incident response scenario. The CySA Plus exam loves MITRE ATT&CK, so let's map this out. First is initial access. The attack started with an email. We know this because Outlook spawned the malicious process chain. This wasn't a web exploit or a brute force. Someone opened an email attachment. Next in this scenario is execution. Encoded PowerShell being used to execute the payload. This is one of the most commonly tested MITRE ATT&CK techniques on the exam. Make sure you know this one. Persistence. Scheduled tasks and service installs. Both are classic persistence mechanisms. The attacker wants to make sure they have a way back in. Command and control. Using port 4444 instead of 443. The firewall allowed it, which is a gap in egress filtering. Lateral movement. Accessing admin $ on another internal host via SMB. Classic lateral movement technique. And finally, exfiltration. The data left through the same port 4444 channel they used for C2. Clean and simple. So if someone asked you, what type of attack is this? This is an advanced persistent threat-style multi-stage intrusion. It's not ransomware, yet. And it's not just a phishing credential harvest. This is full compromise with exfiltration and lateral movement in progress. And now it's time for some questions similar to what you might encounter on the exam. I'll go through each one. If you want to try answering them yourself, you can pause the video once the answer list is visible. Ready? Question 1. What is the initial access vector? Your options are SSH, brute force, spear phishing, web app exploit, or USB drive. We know Outlook was involved. That points directly to email, so the answer is spear phishing email with a malicious attachment. Question 2. Which indicator of compromise most strongly indicates an active C2 channel? The options here are DNS query to Microsoft, outbound TCP connections on port 4444, Type 3 login for J. Smith, or a file upload to a CDN. A DNS query to Microsoft is benign. A Type 3 login is simply that, a login. A 3.2 megabyte upload is exfiltration, but not specifically C2. The answer is outbound TCP connections via port 4444, which is the C2 channel. Question 3. What is the correct immediate containment action? This is critical thinking time. Our options are Delete the task and reboot. Reset the user's password and monitor for 24 hours. Immediately isolate the device and block the external IP address, or notify the user and ask them to stop the process. Deleting the scheduled task doesn't stop active exfiltration, not to mention they have established persistence, so rebooting won't help. Resetting the password doesn't cut off Meterpreter since that session is already authenticated. Asking the user to stop the process manually is just, no, please don't do that. Okay, the correct answer is to isolate the device from the network and block the C2 IP. When data is actively leaving your environment, you cut the cable. Network isolation is step 1. Then you can investigate without further damage. Question 4. Which MITRE attack technique describes the encoded PowerShell.exe execution? Here we have boot or auto-logon auto-start, command and scripting interpreter PowerShell, remote services using SMB or window admin shares, or spearphishing attachment. The answer here is going to be command and scripting interpreter PowerShell. How did you do on those? 100%, I hope. Stick with me and I'll show you a summary of those correct answers on the next screen and give you some key takeaways from this scenario. Great job going through this PBQ with me. Thank you for following along, and if you found it helpful, please smash the like and subscribe. We're working on more videos as fast as we can. So, takeaway number 1, build a timeline first. Don't just look at individual log lines in isolation. Build a story. What happened first? What followed? Once you have the timeline, the questions answer themselves. Takeaway number 2, know your red flag ports. Port 4444 equals Meterpreter. Port 1337 equals generic hacker port. Port 8080 or 8443 are HTTP or HTTPS alternatives often used for C2. The exam will test if you recognize these. Number 3. Encoded PowerShell is almost always malicious. Legitimate admins rarely need to encode PowerShell commands. On the exam, if you see ENC or encoded command, that's an execution IOC. Takeaway 4. For containment questions, be decisive. The exam wants the most immediate, effective action. Isolation beats monitoring. Blocking beats alerting. When data is leaving, you stop it now, ask questions later. And finally, takeaway 5. Map everything to MITRE attack. Even if the question doesn't explicitly ask for a technique ID, framing your analysis in terms of attack tactics will help you pick the right answer. All right, that's a full PBQ walkthrough from scenario to answers. Again, if this helped you out, please hit the like. It seriously helps the channel and helps other people studying for CySA Plus find this content. And something very important I want to say to you. Good luck on your exam! You got this!